Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. Yet another episode of Crushing Fantasy Football. I am Bryce Lockridge, your host of the show. All right, guys, I don't know what the deal is, but last few videos, my views were a little bit down. No big deal, but if you find yourself watching my videos often and you haven't subscribed for whatever reason, make sure to hit the subscribe button below. It's a huge part of the YouTube algorithm and me building my channel because YouTube loves when people hit that subscribe button. So, just a friendly reminder. I know that some of my favorite content creators, I forget sometimes. I watch the videos, I forget to subscribe. So just a friendly reminder, if you find yourself watching my videos often, make sure to subscribe. It's a key part of me growing my channel. So if you guys want to help me out, just go ahead and do that. But I'm not going to waste your time too much talking about that. We're going to go ahead and get into today's video. In today's video, I'm giving you guys my ultimate guide to the 2023 fantasy football season. So I'm going to be going step by step here, starting with the first thing on my list. And it's that you guys need to understand that this is more of a passing league now, as we know. Now, it's almost a cliche statement at this point. People say it all the time. But I want you guys to understand the relevance of this when it comes to fantasy. You need to be building your team around 3 elite wide receivers. There's not enough workhorse running backs in today's NFL to build your team around 3 running backs. It just isn't like that anymore. It's pretty much impossible. Okay, so going robust RB, it's phased out. It's old. It's an old mindset. It's an old fantasy football strategy that isn't going to work in today's NFL with all these split backfields. And you've also got to realize the fact that, look, these wide receivers, right? They're coming out and getting 10-plus targets a game, a lot of them. Guys like Chris Olave, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs. These are guys that all can average over 10 targets per game from a season-long standpoint this year. And back in the day, that was unheard of. Wide receivers just didn't get that kind of target share. So when you have wide receivers coming out and getting 15-plus targets in a week, you've obviously got to value the wide receiver position more because with this increased target share, they are absolutely lethal for PPR formats. And I would argue that they are now the more important position than running back because you can actually stack your team with 3 elite wide receivers, and the increased target share makes their weekly ceiling insanely high. So build your team around 3 wide receivers, but you also need to make sure that, one of your first 4 picks is one of those workhorse running backs. That's why I implement the hero running back strategy in a lot of my drafts because, well, you want at least one of those workhorse running backs that doesn't have to split a backfield because they can be very polarizing players since there's less of them. So make sure to build your team around 3 elite wide receivers, but also grab one of those stud running backs early. Next on my list, and this is something I've been wanting to talk about with you guys for a while, and that is avoiding recency bias when making your decisions. So I have a few key examples here of when this has bit people in fantasy in the past few years. I want to start with 2021 Patrick Mahomes, weeks 7, 8, and 9. 8.7 fantasy points, 15 fantasy points, 10.4 fantasy points. When this happened, Patrick Mahomes, a lot of people either dropped him or traded him. Some people literally actually dropped him, which is just mind-blowing when you look at it in hindsight. But I thought it was mind-blowing at the time, and a lot of people didn't. A lot of people are like, oh, this guy sucks now. Well, that's absolutely insane. I mean, we had a 3-year sample size, 2018, 2019, 2020, and the beginning of 2021, and we saw that Patrick Mahomes was pretty much the best fantasy quarterback we've ever seen, right? So we have a 3+ year sample size, okay? Then he comes out and has 3 bad weeks, 3 weeks, and people are dropping him or trading him for not nearly as good of players. And this just blew my mind at the time. I was trying to get everybody to not do that, but they did it because people are so inclined to knee-jerk reactions and recency bias that they do things like this. And another reaction last year was Jamar Chase at the beginning of the season, weeks 2, 3, 4, and 5. He was not good. 10.8 fantasy points, 12.7 fantasy points, 12.1 fantasy points, and 12 fantasy points. So that was a 4-week stretch. So people started to panic on Jamar Chase, and then they started selling him for guys like Amari Cooper, which is completely ridiculous to come out and just because your first-round draft pick had a bad start to the season, you're going to sell him for a guy that was getting drafted in round 5. And everybody knows how much I like Amari Cooper, especially this year with Deshaun Watson. But selling Jamar Chase last year for Amari Cooper, who didn't even have a quarterback throwing him the ball, makes absolutely no sense just because Jamar Chase got out to a slow start. So what happens? Jamar Chase comes out in week 6 and has 32 fantasy points, right after a lot of people sold him after that 4th bust week in a row. He comes out in week 7 and has 33 fantasy points. So he comes out and is the wide receiver 1 in back-to-back weeks in week 6 and 7 after a lot of people sold him off their roster because they make emotional decisions. So avoid those knee-jerk reactions and emotional decisions. Do not be that guy, which leads me right into my next topic, which is buying low on these knee-jerk reactions. Okay, so people are going to do this every year no matter what because people do not learn their lesson. They're going to draft players highly, and at the beginning of the season, especially early in the season, if these players come out and bust in their first, few weeks of the season, or they have 2 or 3 bust weeks early or middle of the year, people are going to sell those players. They don't learn their lesson. They're going to do this because they don't understand that there's ebbs and flows to a fantasy season and that players are going to have ups and downs unless they're Cooper Kupp. So buy low on these knee-jerk reactions. Guys are going to have bust weeks. Justin Jefferson's going to have 2 or 3 weeks this year where he comes out and does absolutely nothing. And people are going to sell him because they're idiots. So make sure to buy low on these knee-jerk reactions, leverage the trade market in your favor, and really take advantage of these people who just don't understand that there's ebbs and flows to a fantasy football season. Next on my list is you need to make sure that you're drafting running backs that catch a lot of passes, right? And I want to give you guys an example of why this is so important. You look at the running back one in PPR last year, it was Austin Eckler, and he did not even rush for 1,000 yards, right? So the fact of the matter is, if you're catching a ton of passes out of the backfield, lining up as a wide receiver and catching passes, you have so much more value as a running back. And you could look at Nick Chubb. He is what kind of, you could really look at here, right? Nick Chubb had over 1,500 rushing yards last year and was the running back 6. He had so many more rushing yards than Austin Eckler. It was absolutely ridiculous. If you told me going into the season that Nick Chubb would have 1,500 rushing yards, Eckler would have less than 1,000, and somehow Eckler would be the RB1 and Nick Chubb the running back 6, I would say that's crazy, but it just goes to show the importance of drafting pass-catching backs this year. Now, I don't want you to think that I want y'all to avoid Nick Chubb this year because of that last year. He still has a ridiculously high ceiling, and he will catch more passes now that there's no Kareem Hunt in the backfield. So Nick Chubb's still a very good fantasy option, but as far as last year, it just illustrates the importance of drafting running backs that catch a lot of passes. Next on my list is this is going to be best ball specific. If you are optimizing, If you are optimizing for best ball, right, know that the Chiefs and Bengals, the Cowboys, the Lions, and the Ravens and the Dolphins have the highest projected Vegas point totals for the final week of the season. And obviously, if you're playing in these large field best ball tournaments, you want the highest ceiling possible in week 17. So guys that are on the Chiefs, Bengals, Cowboys, Lions, Ravens, and Dolphins are the most optimal plays for that week. We know that the Chiefs and Bengals have average defenses at best, and they have 2 of the highest scoring offenses in the NFL. Cowboys, Lions, we all know that's going to be a high-scoring game. And Ravens, Dolphins, remember last season in week 2 when Tua and Lamar both went off and had like over 40 fantasy points in the same game. So that matchup, Ravens, Dolphins, has super massive shootout potential. So make sure to go in and draft players on these teams when you're optimizing for best ball and optimizing for the final weeks of the season. Okay, next point on my list is when you're making tough roster decisions as to who to start on a weekly basis, when you're making your in-season lineup setting decisions, is make sure to check Vegas point totals in these games. This is the easiest tiebreaker. If you're super unsure on who you want to play at your flex and you have 2 really good players and you're not sure which one to decide on, the easiest tiebreaker is to just play the player that's in the higher scoring game, right? So check the Vegas point totals on games each week. This is going to be an easy tiebreaker in determining which player you want to play. If you have a tough lineup decision and these 2 players are very close, simply pick the player that's in the game that's projected to be higher scoring. Next and final thing on my list, and this is critically important, is you guys need to draft for depth. Now, the reason that this is critically important is because you look at every fantasy roster in fantasy football every single season, and you can draft a really good team, but even if you win your fantasy championship, right, you can look at your team at the end of the season, and 50 to 60% of your roster is completely different than what it was on draft day, and this is just how it works. The team that you draft is not going to be your final lineup on draft day. Even if it seems like you drafted all the perfect players and you had your best draft of all time, your lineup will still be different at the end of the season when you win your fantasy championship than it is on draft day. Right? And a lot of this is because some players are simply going to underperform. It happens every single season. It will happen this season. A large percent of the field of players that are drafted highly will underperform. It is an absolute guarantee. And injuries are an absolute guarantee. Football is a dangerous game. There's going to be a ton of injuries this year. So if you're not drafting for depth and you don't have great backup running backs and wide receivers, then it's really going to cost you. You guys have got to stack your bench with running backs and wide receivers that could come in and provide elite fantasy value if your main guys goes down. So make sure to draft for depth. All right, guys, I appreciate you guys tuning into today's video. I really hope that this video helped. I feel like it was one of my more helpful videos that I've posted so far this off season because I, included a bunch of different points. So I really hope that you guys found this video helpful. Real quick, a quick reminder for you guys. What I want you guys to do is if you're still here watching this video, I created a Patreon for this channel about a month and a half ago. So if for whatever reason you haven't heard or haven't gotten the news that I created a Patreon for this channel, we are running a fantasy league this season, and we already have 7 spots filled. So there's only 3 spots left in the Patreon league. So what I'm doing for this league is I'm paying out $150 to the winner out of my pocket on top of the league pot. All right, so whatever the league pot is, that's going to be what, first place wins, and second place is going to get a little bit of something, but it's pretty top heavy. The person who wins the league is going to get the most. And then I'm paying $150 out of my pocket on top of the league pot. And it's only a 10-man league, so it's going to be very winnable. We have 7 spots filled. We have 3 spots remaining. So, guys, if you are looking for an additional fantasy league, we got you. Join the Patreon league while it's still open. Like I said, we have 3 spots left, so it's probably going to fill up in the reasonably near future. So, make sure to go join that Patreon league right now. And you're also going to get awesome benefits joining my Patreon, such as my rankings. I post updated rankings that are season-long rankings year-round for my Patreon, and then you're going to get my in-season rankings. You're going to get one-on-one breakdowns of your fantasy rosters in video formats. You're going to get all kinds of good things, and so it's going to be hugely beneficial for you. If you are into sports betting and you want to join my Patreon as an elite member, I can give you sports betting advice throughout the season and help you set financial goals and help you win money this year with your sports betting. So that's going to be tremendously important as well. So the bottom line is the Patreon has a ton of really helpful advice. And, I also provide rankings as far as, player values and everything like that. I include a list of rankings that are based on player value and not just overall rankings, but whether they have elite value, average value, okay value, everything like that. So there's a ton of tremendously helpful tools. If you want to gain a massive edge on your opponents, join my Patreon. All my databases, all my advanced analytics are on there. It can be tremendously helpful for you winning your league. All right, guys, appreciate you tuning in. Catch you later.